Doesn't have to be Marvel. You're
Harry
right.
Potter and D&D. I don't know about you.
I don't think so. Like what
That's a
I've
match
heard,
made in heaven, I tell you.
what I've heard is that there was back when Harry Potter was much more popular
It's
even
still
than it is now.
it's really
Yes, it's
popular.
still popular, but back when it was at its height, I heard that Wizards was in talks, but that
Oh, really?
the IP holder obviously
Mm-hmm.
was really had really wild and outrageous beliefs about the IP. And so it came down to just like
Money.
no, not even money, just weird stuff where it's like, well, would they be able to use this to play any of the characters from my books? And they're like, well, they usually make their own character.
Right.
No, I'd be like, but could they possibly make one of the characters from my books and then play it? It's like, well, I guess they could, but like, we're not gonna like
Right.
do that. But I mean, it's got rules, so they could do whatever they want. I guess it's like, well, then never.
Yeah, I see that. I look. I get
so
that.
like, and then it like broke down for some very unusual ideological reasons. So I really don't think that they're gonna try to do that again, because apparently they spent a decent amount of time thinking about it before it broke down. So that would be a waste of their resources unless they had a reason to believe that someone other than J.K. Rowling had control over whether or not they could do that contract.
Yeah, now that makes sense because there's a lot of brand protection, and that's actually a big deal because if you have very famous characters, like a good example of that is like, well, I don't want anyone to have the ability to play Harry Potter. I just, it's like we can't have that. It's like, well, it's a role playing game. A video game you can control that. A role playing game you can. It's like, well, I don't want to have
the video
that.
game they could make a character who they try to make look like Harry Potter, but ultimately the character, and they could, if there's a name that you could enter in,
right,
you could write Harry Potter on it, but ultimately they aren't like this Mary Sue character that has all this exact backstory of Harry Potter, whereas in a tabletop role playing game they could be. You could say that it really is in their universe Harry Potter. In the video game, it won't be. Although, like in Lego Harry Potter, you can play Harry Potter, and in the Harry Potter video games, you can play.
Harry Potter, yeah, the original ones.
But I guess that you can only do the things that were in the books or that the game codes or something. Look, I don't know. I'm hearing this just like secondhand from people who were involved in the process.
That makes
sense. Who are telling old war stories about what happened and why it seems like something that would have happened, but that never did.
I'm going to tell you why that totally makes sense. I'm going to tell you a story. So it's Steven's story time. My brother, as you well know, is a costume designer in Hollywood, and he did Ghostbusters recently. But before that, Danny was offered, and my brother's name is Danny, he was offered to do Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man. Sorry, the Amazing Spider-Man. That's the ones with, was it Andrew Garfinkel? And it's the second. It's not the first, it's not the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. It was the next one.
Yeah,
and I was like,
the in-between Spider-Man, between that and the Marvel Universe one.
Right. And I was like, oh my God, Danny, that sounds awesome. And he's like, yeah, I turned it down. I'm like, why? I'm like, why'd you turn down Spider-Man? That sounds great. And he's like, well, because I would have no control over anything. Because all the costumes for Spider-Man and all the principals are designed by Sony. They do everything. I'm basically just putting costumes on the extras and the background characters, and that's it. And I don't want my name attached to something that I'm not working on because it's going to say costume designer Danny Glicker, but I didn't do any of those costumes. Those are all done. They're mostly CG. They're not even costumes. They're things that are being done in the computers. So he's like, I'm not going to do that. And then he was offered Lord of the Rings, and he was offered Wheel of Time. He has been offered a lot of very high-profile things. And again, he turned them down. But guess what? He was offered Ghostbusters, and He's very good friends with Jason Reitman. Danny has done almost all of Jason Reitman's movies, who's Ivan Reitman's son. And if you look him up, Danny and Jason have done almost all their movies together. Danny also did his very first movies ever. So they're very good friends. Danny goes to his house all the time. And he got full control over the Ghostbusters costumes, and they were real costumes. So he's like, yes, I will do it. And he did. In fact, if you want to look him up, look up Danny Glicker and Adam Savage. And Danny did this thing with Adam Savage of how he built the costumes on YouTube. So if you want to see that, you can look it up. Anyhow, the point being is that when you do these co-brands, a lot of times the holders have full control over their properties. In this case, Spider-Man and Venom and any of the villains, they need to have full control. So what you're saying about this story about J.K. Rowling having full control over Harry Potter and any of the main characters,
but it's not like in the book's illustrations. It's like weird control in your living room of like, you know what? She's probably going to be horrified about this, but I bet people dressed up as Harry Potter as little kids and played make-believe games with their family where they were Harry Potter and did what they wanted to do doing that. And I'm sure that...
Well, I have another story about Harry Potter. I did the Harry Potter website for Scholastic, and I did Harry Potter screensavers. Remember back then? Remember when screensavers were like a really big deal? Do you remember that, Mark? 25 years ago?
Yes. It was an ancient time.
Remember the flying toasters and all that crap?
Yes. Yes, or the Windows logo moving around, or just the weird, colorful lines and all those things.
I programmed a Harry Potter screensaver for Scholastic that you can download and install. But when I worked with Scholastic, they said to us, this was actually, I remember because this was so hard, the only graphics we were allowed to use is all the graphics in the book and the cover. And that's it. We couldn't make anything ourselves, ever. And I was like, you don't have that many. Now, there are little pictures of each chapter, so we had to figure out how to make a screensaver out of these black and white images from Harry Potter books and like do like a website from that. I mean, we did because that's all we had, but I completely believe you because I myself worked on Harry Potter, and that is the rules that we had to abide by. So everything you're saying sounds 100% right. So if that helps you, Mark.
I mean, it came from credible like people, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if she was weird about it, given some of the other stuff she's done, right?
Yeah.
So
now that's very common because I also worked with Disney, and I did Timon and Pumbaa games and interstitials for ABC, and I know this sounds crazy. Disney was great. They were really easy to work with.
You mentioned Disney were a good client.
They were beautiful to work with. They were lovely. And they gave us a lot of freedom as long as it looked and like, you know, and we were in New York, they were in California. We would send them our comps and they loved it. They thought as long as, because our stuff looked like Timon and Pumbaa, and they gave us pictures. We made it match. And they're like, yeah, that looks great. As long as, you know, we use the right colors. Now, granted, okay, this is all getting really weird. I've said this before. A lot of people worked for me worked in Marvel.
Well, I know you have a lot of connections with Marvel through the years.
So we were very conscious of the animation. And I used to teach animation at NYU. It's like I was very conscious of like you have to have the right number of fingers. You have to have the right number of stripes on the arms. Like if you look at, Bart Simpson, he has to have the right number of points on his head for his hair. Like that's not arbitrary. Like the number of hairs on Homer's head is always 3. Like these have to always match. It has to be exactly the same. And because we had people who worked in the comic industry, and because I taught animation, we knew that. So we made sure it always looked exactly the same. And because of that, it was really easy to work with them. But let me tell you, that's pretty rare. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more common because I think it's taught more in colleges, but, you know, you'd be amazed how many people will take things and decide that here's their chance to put a mark on Timon and Pumbaa from Lion King and make it look like they want it to look. Like, no, that will get vetoed and will never see the light of day. You need to work within their property. And that is the essence of co-branding, is that you need to make sure that you keep the feel and the look and the design coherent to the brand that you're representing.